What if the most influential and revolutionary guitarist in the history of rock was a man who saw the instrument as little more than a tool, a man who consistently displayed a profound disinterest in the very culture of the guitar hero he unwillingly helped to define? This is the central, maddening paradox of Robert Fripp, a figure who stands not alongside his peers, but in a category of one, a lone surveyor on a distant and forbidding musical continent of his own discovery. To understand his greatness is to discard every tired cliché about rock and roll. Forget the blues wailing, hip-thrusting peacockery of the 60s and 70s guitar gods, those minstrels of machismo who treated the guitar as a phallic extension of their own egos. Fripp was the anti-hero, a seated, austere, often severe-looking intellectual who approached music not as a messy emotional outpouring, but as a discipline, a science, and at its highest level, a form of impersonal magic. His monumental contribution was not to add to the existing language of rock guitar, but to tear it down to its foundations and invent a new, often brutalist, and staggeringly intelligent vocabulary from first principles. He was not there to entertain you. He was there to reorganize your nervous system. To grasp the magnitude of Fripp's initial impact, one must cast one's mind back to the musical landscape of the late 1960s. The British music scene was utterly saturated with the blues. It was the lingua franca, the default setting. A generation of brilliant young guitarists, Clapton, Page, Beck, Green, had made their pilgrimage, not to the Mississippi Delta, but to the imported records of Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and B.B. King. They had learned the sacred texts of the pentatonic scale and were busy electrifying them, creating a powerful, virile, and undeniably effective new form of rock music. It was the sound of the era, and Robert Fripp wanted no part of it. His rejection was not born of snobbery, but of a clear-eyed and ruthless self-assessment. He knew he was not by nature a bluesman. The particular emotional frequency of that music did not resonate with him, and his attempts to play it felt inauthentic. He was a European, and his sensibilities were tuned to a different tradition. While his contemporaries were finding God in a bent blue note, Fripp was hearing something else entirely, in the dissonant, jagged string quartets of Bela Bartok and the violent, paganistic rhythms of Igor Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. His famous self-posed question, "What would Hendrix sound like playing the Bartok string quartets?" is the Rosetta Stone to his entire career. It reveals a mind determined to synthesize the visceral power of rock with the structural and harmonic complexity of 20th century classical music. This was not a popular or commercially savvy path. It was a declaration of otherness. When King Crimson's debut album, In the Court of the Crimson King, landed in 1969, it was an extinction-level event for the psychedelic dreams of the fading decade. It sounded nothing like anything else. The opening track, 21st Century Schizoid Man, was a musical panic attack. Fripp's guitar solo in that piece is a landmark moment. It is not a solo in the traditional sense. It is a controlled detonation. It is a torrent of notes played with a terrifying machine-like precision, using alternate picking at a ferocious speed, deliberately avoiding the comfortable clichés of the blues in favor of angular, chromatic runs that sound more like a free jazz saxophone than a rock guitar. It was a statement of intent. The guitar could be a weapon of intellectual assault, not just a tool of seduction. Elsewhere on the album, on tracks like Epitaph, he demonstrated a completely different side, crafting lyrical, cello-like melodic lines that soared over the mellotron's funereal grandeur. Then, on the extended improvisation of Moonchild, the guitar dissolved into delicate pointillistic fragments, exploring texture and space. In the space of one record, Fripp had established a lexicon for the guitar that encompassed brutal modernism, romantic lyricism, and avant-garde abstraction. He had made the instrument bigger. This initial vision proved too intense to sustain. The original King Crimson fractured under the strain of its own rapid success, and thus began the pattern that would define Fripp's career, a relentless cycle of formation, exploration, and dissolution. Fripp is the sole constant member in King Crimson's torturous 50-year history, precisely because King Crimson was never truly a band in the democratic, all-for-one sense. It was a vessel for his musical inquiries, a high-pressure laboratory where brilliant musicians were recruited, subjected to the inhuman rigors of his vision, and often summarily dismissed when he felt the way of doing things had reached its terminus. He was, and is, by all accounts, a difficult man to work with, but this difficulty was not born of a petty, rock-star ego. It was the byproduct of an uncompromising, almost fanatical pursuit of a specific musical goal. He once stated that music is a quality, and the band is the vehicle which allows that quality to be expressed. When the vehicle became inefficient or compromised, it was discarded. The music came first, the band second, and the individual a distant third. This unforgiving hierarchy is why Crimson's music never stagnated, never devolved into self-parody. Each incarnation was a radical reinvention, because Fripp himself was in a constant state of becoming. The incarnation of King Crimson that existed from 1972 to 1974, featuring bassist vocalist John Wetton and drummer Bill Bruford, is perhaps the most potent example of Fripp's vision made manifest. This was a power trio, later augmented by violinist David Cross, that took the promise of schizoid man and expanded it into a full-blown musical philosophy. The music became heavier, darker, and more reliant on volatile group improvisation. This was not the meandering, drug-fueled jamming of the Grateful Dead. This was a high-wire act of collective composition in real time, often built on fiendishly complex structures. Listen to the title track of Larks's Tongues in Aspic. The main guitar riff is built on the tritone, the so-called diabolus in musica, or devil in music, an interval so dissonant it was avoided for centuries in Western music. Fripp weaponized it. The sound is aggressive, unsettling, and utterly compelling. The band's masterpiece from this era is arguably the track Fracture from their final studio album, Starless and Bible Black. The final section of the piece is a moto perpetuo, perpetual motion, exercise for the guitar, a relentless, unbroken stream of notes picked with surgical precision at blistering speed, requiring a level of stamina and concentration that bordered on the superhuman. Fripp himself has said that performing it was a tightrope walk, where a single mistake would cause the entire structure to collapse. This was the core of his philosophy in action. Through immense discipline, a state of heightened awareness and potential freedom could be achieved. Then, in 1974, at the absolute zenith of their power and influence, Fripp disbanded the group. He felt the energy had run its course, that the musical entity had become cretinous. To the outside world, it was an act of career suicide. To Fripp, it was a necessary act of artistic purification. His subsequent retirement from the music industry saw him retreat not into silence, but into a period of profound theoretical and technical development. It was during this time that he solidified his collaboration with Brian Eno, a partnership of two of rock's premier intellectuals that would change the very function of the guitar. Together, they pioneered a tape looping system he dubbed Frippertronics. Using two reel-to-reel tape recorders, a signal from Fripp's guitar would be recorded on the first machine, and then played back a few seconds later on the second, with the output of the second machine being fed back into the first, to be recorded again. This created a decaying loop, an echo that repeated and slowly faded. By playing new notes over this evolving loop, Fripp could build up dense, complex, and beautiful layers of sound in real time. The resulting albums, No Pussyfooting and Evening Star, are not rock albums. They are blueprints for what would become ambient music. The guitar was no longer just a lead instrument for riffs and solos. It had become a self-contained orchestra, a generator of evolving, atmospheric soundscapes. This was a conceptual leap of immense importance. Fripp had created a system that generated the music, allowing him to act as a conductor or a participant in a process rather than the sole author of every note. He was removing his own ego from the immediate act of creation. This new way of thinking about the guitar as a source of texture made him an invaluable contributor to the work of other visionaries. He was the secret weapon deployed by David Bowie and Eno on the Berlin Trilogy. The story of the recording of Heroes is legendary. Fripp flew into the Berlin studio having never heard the track. Eno and Bowie played him the chord structure, and Fripp using markings on the floor to gauge where his guitar would begin to feed back through the studio monitors, performed that iconic soaring, keening guitar line in 1 or 2 takes. It is one of the most transcendent moments in rock history, a sound of defiant hope and aching melancholy, and it was created almost instantaneously by a man whose intuition was as sharp as his intellect. His distinctive angular guitar sound also became a key component of Peter Gabriel's early solo albums, adding a modernistic, often abrasive edge that signaled Gabriel's decisive break from the pastoral fantasy of his Genesis past. Fripp wasn't just a session player. He was a sonic architect who brought a fully formed worldview to every project he touched. When he returned to the band format in 1981, it was, predictably, a completely new conception of King Crimson. This new quartet, featuring the prodigious talents of drummer Bill Bruford, bassist Tony Levin, and a second guitarist, the wildly inventive Adrian Belew, was designed to function differently. Inspired by the interlocking polyrhythms of Indonesian gamelan orchestras, Fripp envisioned a rock gamelan, where the 2 guitarists would weave intricate, arpeggiated patterns that locked together like the gears of a Swiss watch. On tracks like Discipline and Frame by Frame, it is often impossible to tell who is playing what. It is not a dialogue of lead and rhythm guitar. It is a single, multi-limbed entity. To facilitate this new music, Fripp even invented a new way to tune the guitar, which he called New Standard Tuning, moving in fifths for most of the strings, like a cello or violin, with a minor third at the top. It broke him completely free from the standard chord shapes and scale patterns that had defined the instrument for decades. It forced him, and anyone who adopted it, to fundamentally rethink their relationship with the fretboard. This 1980s Crimson was a marvel of precision, intelligence, and control, perfectly embodying Fripp's ideal of a small, mobile, intelligent unit. Yet, to speak only of Fripp's technique and his musical output is to miss the most profound and unusual dimension of his career. Unsatisfied with simply creating music, he felt compelled to develop a complete system for its transmission, a holistic philosophy he codified into a series of teachings known as Guitarcraft. Beginning in the mid-1980s, Fripp began holding intensive residential courses in secluded locations, far from the distractions of the modern world. These were not rock and roll fantasy camps for weekend warriors wanting to learn the solo from Starless. They were more akin to a monastic retreat or a martial arts dojo. The curriculum was demanding and esoteric. Students were required to adopt new standard tuning and use a specific type of pick, held in a precise manner. The days were structured and rigorous, involving long periods of focused practice, instruction in the Alexander technique to improve posture and eliminate physical tension, and lessons in esoteric philosophies drawn from thinkers like J.G. Bennett and G.I. Gurdjieff. Fripp's teaching was that music was an impersonal force, a quality in the air, and the musician's job was to get out of the way and become a clear channel for it. Discipline was the key. Discipline is not an end in itself, he taught, but a means to an end. The end was a state of relaxed attention and presence that allowed the music to flow through the player. This was a radical, some would say cultish, recontextualization of what it means to be a musician. Fripp taught that how we hold our pick is how we organize our life. This was not a clever metaphor. It was a literal belief that the attention, relaxation, and intention required to master a simple physical act were the same qualities required to live a centered, effective, and meaningful life. He was teaching a way of being in the world, for which the guitar was simply the primary interface. This philosophy produced its own unique musical form in the League of Crafty Guitarists, an ever-changing ensemble of his students playing complex contrapuntal pieces on acoustic guitars. The sound is stunning, a shimmering, intricate web of acoustic sound unlike anything else. While many scoffed at the guru-like aura surrounding Guitarcraft, its aims were deadly serious: to rescue the practice of music from the clutches of commerce and ego, and return it to a place of personal development and spiritual inquiry. From the industrial-tinged double trio King Crimson of the 1990s to the current, multi-drummer Leviathan of the 21st century, Fripp's core principles have remained unchanged. The bands get larger, the technology evolves, Frippertronics giving way to the digitally driven soundscapes that allow him to build immense, ambient cathedrals of sound by himself. But the foundational quest remains the same, the disciplined pursuit of a music that is intelligent, uncompromising, and transformative. His greatness, then, lies not in the speed of his fingers or the catchiness of his riffs. His legacy is far more fundamental. Robert Fripp is the man who looked at the rock guitar, an instrument of glorious primitive power, and demanded that it be more. He demanded that it be intelligent, that it be disciplined, that it be a vehicle for concepts as complex as any in literature or science. He provided an alternative path for the thinking guitarist, one based on rigor, self-awareness, and an almost holy devotion to the music itself, rather than to the empty cult of personality. He never gave the audience what it wanted. He gave it what he believed it needed. In his profound and lifelong disinterest in becoming a guitar hero, he became the most heroic of them all. He saved the instrument from its own worst cliches and, in doing so, ensured its future.